Hi, my name is Colin Canese, and I took a deeper look for my project into predicting MVP voting based on the statistics from the previous season for quarterbacks in the NFL. In the NFL, the MVP award is given out at the end of the year to quote unquote the most valuable player on their team, but a lot of times this award really goes out to the person who put up the best statistics, and it doesn't really follow the title of the award. As I put there, it really goes out to the quarterback with the most spectacular season, emphasis on quarterback as in the last 30 years, I believe there was only 4 or 5 times where a quarterback did not win, and um, it just shows that it's a quarterback dominated league, and it has been for a while. And again, this should be a very straightforward concept, giving out the MVP award, but there's been a lot of years, and especially a lot recently, where there has been big controversy behind who actually wins the award. And this past season, Aaron Rodgers won the MVP over Tom Brady. And me being a football fan, unfortunately a Commanders fan, I believe that Tom Brady deserved the award. But again, that was pretty much a big reason why I dove into this topic specifically. I also dove into breaking my timeline up into seeing how different time periods, which stats actually affected MVP voting the most. Before I even ran a model, I gathered all my data from Football Reference. I took passing data, specifically all the passing stats from all NFL players who threw a pass, dating back to 1987 because that was my cutoff. In 1986, Lawrence Taylor won the MVP award and was the last defensive player to do so. So I felt as though 1987 on was a good time frame, as that was kind of the turning of a quarterback dominated league. And with my data, I brought in some restraints. Um, Obviously, looking at quarterbacks, you had to be a quarterback. There were some seasons where running back, fullback, defensive tackle, someone else threw a football, threw a pass, and I did not want that in the data. Obviously, that is not true to anything to do with the MVP voting. Um, Next, it had to be a minimum of 12 games played. John Elway in 1987 won MVP, playing only 12 games. That was the least amount of games played by a quarterback who won MVP. Least amount of games played, period, by a player who won the MVP award. And lastly, all the seasons I looked at, I only took the seasons where quarterbacks won the MVP award. I know the 2006 season, Sean Alexander won the MVP award. 2012, Adrian Peterson. So I didn't want to include those, since those were kind of outlier years where a quarterback did not win the award. And then with my stats in general, I left out some stats that other people might seem to leave in. I left out longest pass, as I feel that's a one-time scenario. I don't see how it would have a huge impact on MVP voting. Attempts, since I feel like instead of looking at attempts, I took more of a deeper look into completions and completion percentage. And sack yards, I took a look at sacks as a way of trying to taking elusiveness, as I did not really look at running stats for quarterbacks, which kind of I feel like would skew some of the results that I had. But looking at my regression, once I removed all my variables and statistics that I did not want in, I ran a linear regression model. And as we could see in the bottom left, those were my results. The two statistics that had the most statistical significance were wins and passing touchdowns, which makes sense. Obviously, you have to be a winning quarterback to win MVP. You wouldn't want a quarterback holding the award as the most valuable if that value did not translate to wins in the NFL. And passing touchdowns, you need to score to win. So I feel like those two are big, are obvious that they should be pretty statistically significant. However, there were some surprising instances that I came up upon. Completions had a negative coefficient, which was pretty surprising, but it makes sense. More completions you have, I feel like the less you're really airing the ball out, and you're picking up more dump offs underneath, screen passes, stuff like that, which people don't want to see. Wouldn't really be MVP like, in my opinion. And passing yards did not have the statistical significance that I really expected. It is not even significant at the point one level, 10%, which is very, very interesting in my mind. I thought passing yards would be a big a big indicator of MVP and success in winning the award. And I went into that. That was my prediction. I thought the two biggest predictors would be passing yards and wins. And as we can see, there's kind of a positive correlation between the two. The quarterbacks that threw for more yards won more games most of the time. And from that, the quarterbacks who won, but while they won, put up a well than higher than average passing yard season, had a lot of success in winning the award. We see Tom Brady in 2007, Cam Newton in 2015, and even Peyton Manning 2013. Those were the three that really stood out on the graph for most passing yards, most wins, and the most combined between the two. But those that rode the middle of the pack, maybe you could say were average, even if it's just average in one category, average in passing yards, but higher in wins. They didn't really have the MVP success or MVP voting that those who were outliers really did in both categories. When I looked at my actual versus my predicted, there was a lot of parameters that are not in place when it came to predicting the voting results. As you could see, for our predicted values or our predicted MVP voting, we had negative values, which you obviously cannot have. You cannot get negative votes. So putting something in place could have been better, maybe brought in more zeros instead of negatives, because obviously you can see where there's negative predicted values, not a single one there actually had a real MVP vote. But I feel like the model did a fairly well job. We see kind of a positive correlation, which shows that we were predicting close to what our actual MVP values were. But then again, there are some discrepancies. You could see, if I bring my cursor over, we have a predicted of, lower, where you're getting almost 40 MVP votes. That's something that maybe, one, either my model could have predicted better for, or two, shows that why MVP voting is so controversial. And again, on the topic of controversy, I brought in some key seasons where my predicted values, even if not fully reliable, showed that an MVP should have been different from what actually was. In this past season, I know I brought up Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady, but what's crazy from my model is my model predicted that Matt Stafford would have the most MVP votes, which he definitely had an amazing season, but because of his amazing season, his wide receiver Cooper Kupp kind of outshadowed him, which I think is a big reason, where if he didn't really have Cooper Kupp outshadowing him, he might have been more in the loop or in the talks for MVP. 2017 Carson Wentz, that was a big year. Carson Wentz got injured, so I feel like that really derailed his MVP efforts. 2009 Drew Brees, and 2008 Phillip Rivers. I didn't really want to dive too further back. These were the ones that stood out to me, seasons that not so much I remember, but more I've heard about the controversy behind them. I didn't want to dive too far back into the 90s and 80s, where seasons I didn't know, because I couldn't really elaborate too much on the actual why there's controversy behind it. But when I started to look at I took 3 regressions, and I broke them up into 3 different time periods. The first one, 1987 to 1999. The second was 2000 to 2011, and the final one was 2012 to 2021. And in the first period, we see a big correlation between wins, passing touchdowns, and MVP voting. And when we look at the other 2 periods, we don't see as strong of a correlation between these 2 statistics and MVP voting. And we even see that when you get to the final period, which is the period that we're in now, we see the least, especially in wins, which I thought was very surprising. But I feel like that goes to show that back in the 80s and 90s, we were still, not we, but the NFL was still in that kind of running back mode, maybe like hard-nosed football. And now that we get to today, we're not seeing that as much. We're seeing the finesse of the quarterbacks. And because of that, their brilliant seasons are going a bit unnoticed, or maybe not being viewed as great as much, because we've started to see it more and it's become more familiar to us. And again, the difference in the time periods, and again, like I said before, more MVP votes were given in the first period because of wins and touchdowns than they were in the last 2. And these graphs show, as you can see, and for the blue, which is our first time period, we see higher MVP voting, and we see higher MVP voting compared to having higher, maybe not even as high passing touchdowns and wins as our latest two periods. And I feel like that's because, again, these have gotten more common. Passing touchdowns, I know 2013, I believe, was the year Peyton Manning had an outstanding year, breaking a lot of records, and that was a huge year for record breaking wise, as I just said. And because of that, it kind of brought a sense of awe, and like, we've never seen this before, and that's why I feel like maybe he won MVP. Not saying he didn't deserve it, but that could also be a reason, is kind of that bias towards record breaking. And finally, conclusion on what I did. Predicting MVP or in any award, in any league, I feel is just very hard. And a lot of those reasons is the MVP, as I just mentioned, there's an awe factor behind it. You may have a great statistical season, but if you don't have that moment or those moments, I feel like someone who does in the eyes of those who vote, will get more votes. And again, it's really interesting to see that a majority of the MVPs that were correctly picked in my model, but a lot of the times when there was more controversial MVP races, as we saw this past year, my model actually showed a lot closer, even different results, which I don't want to say my model did amazing. As I put there, my model didn't do the best job. There's a lot of things I probably could have done better, but I just think it's interesting that when you bring it into a statistical standpoint, a lot of these controversies can be elaborated upon. And another thing was, only specific people actually vote for MVP. There's only 50 votes brought out anymore. And because of that, we're leaving, for millions of fans who watch the game, the voting is left in the hands of these 50 individuals. And because of that, that's why I feel like we see a lot more discrepancies in what we believe and what is actually voted upon. And I think this could be a good thing, though, for the game, because it brings a lot more interaction, speculation. A lot of people want to talk about it more. They dive deeper into it. And I feel like they watch it more, especially they start watching these specific players and they want to see if they actually deserved MVP or not. And again, I brought up conspiracies. There's conspiracies about everything. And again, for sports, I feel like conspiracies are better. You're going to bring more people into the game, more people want to know is this true or not. And again, MVP voting or any award voting, I feel like is always going to be disputed, and with disputes come conspiracy theories. So thank you. I really hope my topic was interesting, and thank you very much for a great school year.